Hello, in this video we're going to look at how we can define our own financial concepts in XBRLAnalyst. We're going to define all the concepts that we need to compute the tangible price-to-book ratio. And for demonstration's sake, we're going to define all of the concepts regardless of whether or not XBRLAnalyst already provides a standard definition. And so we have here a list of 5 companies, and we have our period specifier which just asks for the most recent quarterly period. And so the first thing that we're going to look for is assets for all of these companies. We're going to use the US GAAP concept, assets. And we see we get a value for 3M, and we can drag it across the 5 companies and see that we get a value for each of the 5 companies. And that's because most companies report their assets using this concept here. For example's sake, we're going to roll this into a definition. So we go to edit my definitions in XBRLAnalyst, and we can make a new definition down here, call it my assets. And we just need to add this singular financial concept here, and this list is just going to be a list of concepts to search through when trying to get a value for this defined concept. So in this case, it's going to look for assets, and if it's not there, then this concept has no value. But if it is there, it's going to take assets, and we could have more tags here, which we'll see later. And so we'll save this, close out of this window, and then we can reference my assets down here and use the same XBRL fact formula to get the value from this definition. Now the next definition that we're going to write is for intangible assets. And so we'll update this name here. Well, we'll look at a company's balance sheet to figure out maybe what kind of tags that we might want. And so here we've got 3M's balance sheet loaded up, and we can see right off the bat that there's 2 good candidates here, goodwill and intangible assets net. So I'm going to click the tags button down here to see which US GAAP tags they actually use. And we see that it's goodwill and intangible assets net excluding goodwill. And so I'm going to take and copy this one and replace assets here with goodwill. And I'm going to insert a new row and put intangible assets down here. Drag this formula down to see what sort of values we get. And it looks pretty good across the board, except for there's something suspicious here. Coca-Cola doesn't seem to report any sort of intangible assets besides goodwill. So we're going to just quickly check this out to make sure that we're not missing anything important with the way that they report their balance sheet. And in fact, we can see that they have a few other intangible assets that aren't grouped under this tag. So they have trademarks, they have franchise rights, and they also have their own sort of other intangible assets. That's an extension concept, in fact. So we're going to make a few more rows over here that we can use. Bring them over. So we have trademarks, financial or franchise rights, and other intangible assets. We can take again and drag this down. And we can write our check value. Obviously it's just a simple sum here across these 5 values. Drag this across, and we see that now all our own match columns aren't matching anymore, and that's because we need to update make a new definition for this. And it's actually extremely simple in XBRLAnalyst to make a definition that sums a number of different concepts. And so we'll make a new definition called my intangible assets. And here we can just take our list from Excel that we've made already and import it into this list. And then in order to make it a sum, we need to add a plus sign at the end here of our tag, and that tells XBRLAnalyst to treat it as a summation rather than as a list of tags to look for. And so we can save this, copy this and paste it over here, and see now all of our match values work out because this is computing the sum like it should be. There's a US GAAP tag that's liabilities, which should get us pretty far along this road. And we see again that it seems to work pretty well for 4 of the 5 companies, but Coca-Cola doesn't report just using the US GAAP concept liabilities. So we're going to go back to the balance sheet using the trace to report feature here. And so at the bottom down here, we see that they have total liabilities and equity, as well as total equity. So what we could do is subtract this value from this value to get a value for their total liabilities. And so again, we'll just make some more space here and copy this one, and then copy just the stockholders' equity. And then we can do the same thing here and drag this all down. And so now we've got values here for Coca-Cola, and all the other companies report this way as well too. And now we need to roll this logic into our own definition so that we can reuse it later. And so again, we go to edit my definitions, create a new definition here called my liabilities. And we can say, first of all, let's just look for liabilities. And then in the case that this doesn't show up, what XBRLAnalyst is going to look at next is this formula feature down here. And so we can specify, general arithmetic formulas over tags and other definitions, any sort of concepts down here. And so we're going to use these ones. We're going to say, we can just copy this and say we want, if liability doesn't show up, we want liabilities and stockholder equity minus just stockholder equity. And so we can save this, my liabilities, and come down here, replace this assets with my liabilities, and then we get the new value. We can see that our match column all works out, so everything's fine here. And we're just going to go straight to making the definition because it's just a formula on the other definitions that we've already made. So we're going to say we want a new definition, and straight to the formula, it's going to be my assets minus my liabilities plus my tangible assets plus. So we can save that, copy this, paste it here. The formulas are getting pretty complicated because our definitions are getting more complicated. But the next thing that we're going to do is we want to actually get this value per share. So we're going to want to divide it by the number of shares. And we'll see that this works again. 4 out of the 5 companies are just fine, but we have some idiosyncrasy over here with Flowers, 1-800-Flowers. So we're going to go look at their report. Again, just trace to the report here. And the number of shares is usually on the cover. So with their cover here, we can see that they've actually reported entity common stock shares outstanding, but they don't give it a plain value. It's actually broken down into 2 different classes of share, Class A and Class B. And so the best way that you can deal with this sort of situation is with a special construct in XBRLAnalyst, which is by using a pipe and an underscore here, which just means to add up all of the members underneath a given concept. And so we can see just by adding this pipe what happens over here. And with Flowers now, we get the Class A shares and the Class B shares added together. And so we can add this to a definition just like everything else. We'll call it my number of shares. And the same thing, we can just add a singular concept here, save it, and then we'll copy this and bring it down just so we can build our checks here. And then our check value is already actually right for us because we copied it from assets, and so this all works out. And we have number of shares. And then we can go straight to computing the price to book ratio, the tangible price to book ratio. And we can get the share price for all of these companies. And then we need to make a definition. And so we can do that. Edit my definitions. And say new definition, call it my PV ratio. And it's going to be just a formula. And then we can save this, copy it, and bring it down here so we can check it. And everything seems to have worked out just fine. So now that we have these definitions, one thing that we might want to do is export them into the current workbook so that we could share them with a colleague. Now to do that, we open the Edit My Definitions tool again, and we simply click the Export button down here. And it'll ask us if we want to export it into the current workbook, which we do in this case, so we click yes. And here we get our definitions. And so later, if we wanted to, we could import these if we didn't have the definitions, or if we received a file like this from a colleague. We could open it up and click the import button to import these definitions back into XBRLAnalyst so we can use them. So that's a quick overview of how definitions work in XBRLAnalyst.